Larry Nager. Larry is an award-winning writer, music historian, documentary filmmaker, educator, and musician. He is the author of Memphis Beat, The Lives and Times of America's Musical Crossroads. He wrote and co-produced the films Bill Monroe, Father of Bluegrass Music, and Sounds of Memphis. Most recently, Larry was the writer, interviewer, music curator, and MC for Rock My Soul, a tribute to the great gospel quartets featuring the Fairfield Four and the McCrary Sisters. You probably may have seen that air locally on NPT here. He has worked with the Recording Academy for the past 15 years, writing and producing short films and live events for the Grammy Foundation. And he is the former music editor for the Memphis Commercial Appeal, the Cincinnati Enquirer, and the Cincinnati Post, and has written for a wide range of publications, including the Oxford American, Rolling Stone, the San Francisco Chronicle, Bluegrass Unlimited, and Living Blues. And as I mentioned, he's a musician, and as a musician, he's an accomplished mandolinist, bassist, guitarist, and I learned this, the inventor of the triple washboard. He has worked on music projects for several record labels, including Smithsonian Folkways and Rounder, as a performer and producer, and he has performed on a Prairie Home Companion and at the Kennedy Center, the Library of Congress, and at venues in several other countries from China to France to New Zealand. And he is, like I said, he's known Philip for 20 years, and we're very, very grateful that he brought Philip to us. He's been very passionate about this and bringing them to our attention and leading today's program. Please join me in welcoming Larry Nager.
Hi folks, and welcome to the Ford Theater. This is my favorite room in town, and I've got one of my favorite people with me. Philip Hall, kind of today is Rhythm and Blues Day here at the Ford. We've got the great Arnie Gord sang on that documentary. And Philip is on some of the best and most important rhythm and blues records recorded in the 1950s into the 60s. And he worked primarily at King Records in those days. We're sort of bringing you from Nashville to Cincinnati today at a time when Cincinnati was a recording center, broadcasting center with WLW. Chet Atkins was on the staff there before he came to Nashville. Mel Travis was on the staff of the station. We had the Midwestern Hayride up there. And a lot of very unique things we'll be talking with Phil that made this, the area a center for music and broadcasting. Publishing Billboard magazine started in Cincinnati. But what made Cincinnati the real center was King Records. And the important part of that story here is that Phil was the house drummer at King Records from 1952 into 1965. And in that time, King recorded jazz and blues and rhythm and blues, country music, and bluegrass music. And if there were drums on any of those records, with the exception of James Brown's recordings, it was Philip Hall playing on them. So I could stand here and tell you that. And he's still playing today. He is 90 years old, and you can hear him play 4 or 5 sets of music a night at the Cincinnati Hotel, which may be the secret of life, I think. Maybe a good part of that. He's amazing. He's one of my favorite people, and he made an awful lot of history, and we're going to talk about it now. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, all the way from Cincinnati, Ohio, Philip Hall. To an immigrant family, and also so tell us your very earliest background, you when you remember music.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for that beautiful welcome. And this is a little new to me. You know, most of the time I'm sitting behind the drums. That's where I come in, and that's where I leave. I'm always the last one to leave. But I seem to be first tonight, I want to say. But I'm a native New Yorker. I was one of 5 kids born to my parents. They came from the Caribbean. My father was from St. Croix, Virgin Islands. My mother was Puerto Rican. And I don't know if you know anything about West Indian people, but the parents are very strict. And my father was very strict. He was a trumpet player. He had a day job, but played trumpet. I had an uncle who played alto saxophone, sounded like Ornette Coleman. And I had an uncle, another uncle, that played drums, and he was my first teacher. He was a kind of a drummer where he would twirl the sticks and catch them and not miss a beat. You know, very eye-catching individual. So of course I fell in love with that, and I started banging on tables with food spoons and forks, knives, and my father noticed that I had some rhythm, you know, so he wanted me to become a musician anyway because he played trumpet. And he spoke to me one day and he said, I want you to play an instrument. You want to play the trumpet? I said yes, but after a couple of lessons, I kind of gave that up because it was painful to your embouchure, your mouth, and I didn't like that. So we saw an ad in the newspaper for World Music Company. It was the national music company on the whole, all through the United States. And you could buy a set of drums, not buy, but like rent them for $10 a month, and you get 10 lessons. So my father said, I think that's a good deal, and we'll try that. And you rent it, you dislike the drums, we can take them back, and I won't be having any money, so it's fine. That was my opportunity. I took that and I ran with it. I learned how to play drums well enough to play with the young kids on the street. So he bought me, after that he bought me a better set of drums, and I started playing with him in his band he had.
And where were they playing at that time? What would the gigs be like?
Yeah, my father used to play house parties, like, you know, they started 10 o'clock at night and last till maybe 8 o'clock in the morning.
Were you going to school at that time too? Were you going to school at that time too?
Yeah. Well, most of the gigs were on the weekend.
Oh.
You know, it wasn't that. Anyway, I played some gigs with him. He carried my drums for me, and I learned how to play calypso rhythms, which I do today. I mean, you heard Sonny Rollins' St. Thomas, and there's a West Indian musician, the Lion, that he lived in New York, and he played a lot of calypso rhythms, and they intrigued me. In fact, today, I still play a lot of calypso rhythms in my little gig in Cincinnati.
And there was almost like not a revival of calypso, but calypso was a big deal in New York in the 40s. There were concerts, and it wasn't just for the community, which was large, but it was also for the folks around the area too. So almost like an early folk revival, I think, for people that came out.
And being a child of West Indian parents, I have to play calypso. You know, that's my heritage. However, I got good enough to go out on the street and play with some of the jazz players.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves here, because you've got some demonstrations to do here. We've got to play a calypso.
Yeah, Larry wants me to demonstrate.
That's right. I think Phil usually starts with a ritual that's not done very often today. Is he tunes his drums. Do we have any drummers in the crowd today? Do you tune your drums?
Yes, sir.
All right. It's like flossing. It's important. Take it away, Mr. Paul.
To me, it's very important to have your drums in some kind of tuning position, because you just can't take the drums out of the box and play them. That's impossible. And I was fortunate, when I came in here and saw these drums, I said, I told Harry, I can't do the tuning thing today. These drums are perfect. They're beautiful, aren't they? Yeah. Well, I usually start with the bass drum. This bass drum sounds pretty good here. And if you have a piano, the drummer can use low C to tune your bass drum to low C. And gradually go up the scale, middle C to your floor tom-tom. This is almost in tune. Tighten it up a couple of rungs and keep trying it until the sound appeals to you. That's a little bit better. And you tune your snare drum to mid to higher C. That sounds almost in tune, but that's the idea. You can go around the drums and create a musical effect. Just you can't have abstract sounds to the drum set, because that makes everything sound bad. That floor tom-tom needs a little tuning. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but that's what the process you have to go through to make your drum sound good.
So why don't we hear a sample of calypso, and then after that you can play like what a drum rhythm for a calypso song would be. So if we could hear the first musical recorded sample, it'll be the Harry Belafonte piece. By the way, Phil grew up in New York at the same time two other West Indian immigrants, Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier, were in that same West Indian community. It was a very thriving immigrant community in New York at the time. What would a rhythm be isolated? Very good. So how would like a sample calypso rhythm? Oh, actually, here I come back to the chair at this point. Phil. Oh. Come on back. So as at this point, Phil's a teenager. He's working in New York. He's working with his dad. But of course, the big music that was happening back then in the 40s, mid-40s or so, was bebop. It was the newest thing. It was as new. I guess the comparison would be for inner city kids today with hip-hop. It's something a young guy would be drawn to. And there was a great scene to plug yourself into back in New York. So tell us about your jazz experiences then.
Yeah, I guess I got pretty good on the drums, and one night my buddy and I decided to go to a Minton's Playhouse. That was a jazz club in New York where Miles Davis and Charlie Parker were playing with Ben Webster, the big guys. And every Monday night they had an open jam session night where, you know, if you felt qualified, you could play. So we were drinking. We had a couple of drinks. And I went up and I asked Charlie Parker, could I sit in and play? You know, that was a mistake of my life. But he said, sure, you know, this is an open jam session. You think you can cut it, you can play. So I went up and sat on the drums. In the meantime, Miles was standing up in the corner with his back to the audience like he usually does. And Charlie Parker was standing out front by the mic. Kenny Clark was playing the drums, and he got up, he never even looked at me and walked away. So I knew I was in trouble, man. I sat down and they just looked at me, you know, and then I saw Charlie Parker doing like this. I said, I wonder what is he doing? And they started playing Cherokee. And God, the thing was flying. I think I played maybe 2 choruses, and that was it. I had to get up. I was very embarrassed. People looked at me and said, what is he doing up there? But Charlie Parker said to me, he said, you all right, son? He said, just go home and practice some more and come back, and we'll let you play again. But be ready next time. So that was a lesson to me. I went home and practiced for months, a couple of years in fact. Then I went back and I was able to play Cherokee. I was accepted then as a drummer.
And your first real, I guess, big-time professional gig was with the Buddy and Ella Johnson Orchestra. Was that the?
Yeah.
And that was a big band, but there was sort of, this is kind of in the post-war, post-World War II era. And in the Country Music Hall of Fame, you can see all of the things that were happening there. There was a lot of vitality and energy in the country. So bluegrass music started at the end of 1945 into 46, high-energy version of string band music. Honky-tonk music was starting. Some people like Hank Williams starting to come up. And the same thing was happening in jazz and rhythm and blues. The big bands were kind of destroyed by World War II between the draft and you know, they couldn't get gas for the buses. And so you started seeing smaller combos starting to come out. Better amplification, more emphasis on the amplified instruments like guitar, into what would become rhythm and blues in a few years. And you were playing in that era, in that time of that. In fact, there's this almost symbolic your transition between the Buddy and Ella Johnson band into the smaller group with Tiny Bradshaw, which is one of the first real R&B type bands to come up. So tell us how you got the Buddy gig and how that changed into Tiny.
I was playing with it was a group in New York called the Manhattan Sextet. It had about 8 musicians, and a friend of mine was a trombone player, and he suggested to Buddy Johnson to hire me, and that was the first big band I ever played with. It wasn't very difficult. They had some you know, simple charts. I remember Rick Pricelock's brother Arthur was singing with the group, and Buddy Johnson had his sister also singing with the group. And I was playing at the Savoy Ballroom, and Tiny Bradshaw, it was the Savoy Ballroom employed 2 sets of musicians, a big band and maybe an octet, or at least 10 pieces in the group. And of course I was with Buddy Johnson, and Tiny Bradshaw approached me one night during the break. He said, my drummer's leaving in a couple months, and I'd like for you to come to Cincinnati and join me. I didn't pay any attention at the time because no one really wants to leave New York and your connections. You know?
It's the jazz capital of the world.
Yeah. But that move changed my life because he called me a couple months later, and unfortunately or fortunately, I wasn't working at that time. So I got on a bus with my drums and came to Cincinnati.
All right. And Tiny Bradshaw was recording for King Records. They worked primarily at a place called the Cotton Club, which was kind of the Cincinnati version of the Cotton Club. It had no real connection to the one in New York, but it was the classiest black nightclub in the city. Did whites ever go there, or was there integrated in any way?
Yeah, you gotta remember, it was this was before the Civil Rights Act was enacted, and but it didn't apply to the Cotton Club in Cincinnati.
Or King Records. King Records was an integrated business from the late 40s on. It was blacks and whites working in the studio and on the line. The second in command to Sid Nathan, who owned it, was Henry Glover, who was an African-American trumpet player, and co-wrote with the Delmore Brothers Blues Stay Away From Me. So there's always been a lot of interaction. I think you can go back to Fiddletons and that sort of thing of African-Americans and whites creating what we know as country music. But when Phil got to King Records, it was primarily a rhythm and blues label. It had started kind of as an offshoot almost in the Midwestern Hayride, which was the big barn dance they had in Cincinnati on WLW back then. But it went into rhythm and blues because, frankly, the country music Sid was making wasn't selling. His first record was by a duo called the Shepherd Brothers, who were in reality Grandpa Jones and Merle Travis, both of whom were working on the Boone County Jamboree Midwestern Hayride show. But the rhythm and blues really caught on. Lonnie Johnson, who was a bluesman from the 20s, who recorded with Duke Ellington, as well as made some great duo guitar records with Eddie Lang, Bing Crosby's guitar player. And Eddie used a pseudonym because he didn't want to, it was an integrated record made in the 20s. But Lonnie made a rhythm and blues ballad called Tomorrow Night, and had a huge hit with that. I think he was in his 40s or 50s by that time. But the big records were being made, and they were almost like proto-rock and roll. That if you've seen the Sam Phillips exhibit that's on display here, a lot of the records that they were listening to in Memphis and then turning into rockabilly music were coming from King Records as this kind of jump blues, rhythm and blues music. And we'll hear two tracks that became rockabilly records, but were originally recorded on King by black artists. One's by Wynonie Harris, who is one of the great, I think maybe the greatest blues shouter of all time. And the other was by the Tiny Bradshaw Orchestra, before Phil joined. And the drummer on this would be a guy named Eagle Eye Shields, who also recorded, I think he recorded some with Moon Mullican, on those kind of, again, sort of this hillbilly, boogie, almost rock and roll. So we'll hear a couple of recorded samples. One's Good Rockin' Tonight by Wynonie Harris, first heard on King Records, and then Train Kept A-Rollin', which was cut by the Rock and Roll Trio, by the Yardbirds, by Aerosmith, and a whole bunch of other folks. So we'll hear a couple of those tracks.
She was a hipster and a gone dame.
Cincinnati to play with at the time.
Right. I like to inject something in, and as you can hear on both of those tunes, it's like rhythm and blues, jump blues. I'm an oddity because right now I have my own trio in Cincinnati. I'm working at the Cincinnati Hotel, and we play jazz. When I'm on the street, I play jazz, but when I'm at the studio, I play whatever is asked of me. And that's kind of odd today because I know some jazz musicians wouldn't touch this. You know, they wouldn't touch any other music, but I'm of the belief that if you can handle it, do it. Make the money.
But one of the things is that the Bradshaw art wasn't all that far from jazz. There were some of the great saxophone players with the
Yeah. Tiny Bradshaw had Sonny Stitt, Johnny Griffin from Chicago. You had Al Sears. You had Syl Austin. You had good musicians like Sam Jones that eventually went with Oscar Peterson. So, I mean, he didn't have any cheap musicians. They could play, but just that he played jump blues. And there's nothing wrong with it, but I had to make that clearance to people out sitting out there.
So if you go to Cincinnati and go to the Cincinnati Hotel on a weekend, you will see the Philip Paul Trio, where he's still playing 4 sets, 5 sets a night. And no cover, so there you go for that. But we're glad Phil took some time off and came down here. When your thing, though, what established you with the Tiny Bradshaw Band was not that hard kind of backbeat that you're hearing on those 2 records, but he wanted something different, something that moved it closer to jazz, and in fact featured a fairly jazzy solo by Red Presley.
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time, but it was a calculated move when he approached me to join his band, because he wanted, Eagle Eye had been with the band a long time, and everything was in that vein, that hard backbeat all the time. And he wanted me to play brushes on a tune that became the #1 hit seller, which is Soft. I'm pretty sure Larry will play that for you. But
I was hoping you would play it for us. Actually, this is another drum demo with Soft.
I'll try it again.
And I'll say something about Phil's playing too. Is that while he's setting up on the drums, is that he didn't come out of a strict jazz or a strict blues background. I think the fact that he came up playing that West Indian music, the Caribbean music, you had that Afro-Caribbean sound, and that the drumming was much more complex, polyrhythmic, and not as, I guess, not necessarily as simple, but not as that direct. He floated. I'd say, I guess the comparison would be, if you know about boxing history, would be the old style was more like a Sonny Liston approach to it, and Phil's kind of the Muhammad Ali of the drums. He just floats a little bit with the rhythm, and that I think is what makes his music unique. So we'll hear Phil's hit with the Tiny Bradshaw Orchestra, and he will play along, Soft. that was a huge hit for the Tiny Bradshaw Orchestra, and as a result, pretty much you were the brush man from then on at Kansas.
That's right. After we made that recording, everything changed then. We played all the jazz clubs from New York to San Francisco. And I played brushes on everything. Once you make a hit for a recording company, it's hard to escape that label. So I had to play brushes on everything we did.
They know about that in this town, I would say. And if you'll come on back here. And well, so at this point, Phil is established at King. He's responsible largely for a hit record. He's established his own style, and which naturally caught the ear of Sid Nathan. And Sid made you an offer not long after that, I think, right?
Oh yeah, Sid Nathan. Now I don't know if any of you have read about this gentleman, but he was a character, and he interacted with a lot of his musicians, especially if you were one of the session musicians. And I'm going to move ahead with you a little
Well, no, we've got to stay here. Basically, what happened with this was he made you the offer of being the house drummer at King and helped you find a house, literally a house, about a quarter mile from the studio.
Yeah.
So you could just get there. And at that point, you started doing sessions on a pretty full-time basis for him.
Yeah, I'll go back to when we made Soft. Sid approached me and he said, "I'd like for you to be the session drummer for the label." So at that time, I didn't know what that meant, but I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "You plan on for all team recording artists," and that was fine with me because King not only made rhythm and blues, they had a jazz label, they had a country label, and I was able to play for most of those artists. And he said, "I want you to go to the conservatory and learn a little bit more." So I said, "Who's going to pay for it?" And he said, "I'll pay for it." It's cool. So I went to the conservatory in Cincinnati for about 2 years, and that was very enlightening. I'm happy that I was able to do that. But I had my live tutor was a percussion player with the Cincinnati Symphony. And I would go into my lessons, and he knew I was working at clubs at night. And at that time, the bossa nova had just become popular. And he would ask me, "Did you play any bossa novas last night?" I said, "Sure, we did." So he said, "Would you play it for me? I'd like to hear what it sounds like." And every lesson that I went to, he had me play the bossa nova. What I found out, he was trying to learn how to play the bossa nova himself. And as a result, we became good friends. But it just goes to show you that the student can teach the teacher sometimes. And I learned a lot from him, but he learned the bossa nova from me.
Now there was a reason Sid Nathan wanted Phil to be so close to the studio, was so you could get there almost immediately as soon as you got a call. Because we have to talk some about King, which was a completely unique business entity in that not only that it was integrated at a time when no one else was, from top to bottom, but also was entirely under one roof. It was a record company where everything was done on Brewster Avenue in Cincinnati. So that meant you had the offices and you had the studio, which is pretty standard for a recording studio, but you also had all the mastering facilities. You had a pressing plant, so you could make the records on site. You had a printing facility, so you could make the labels on site. And at this point, remember, albums were not as big a deal, but 78s and 45s. This was also the era of the cover record. And when Sid had a very good distribution network, and his distributors would let him know if like another independent record was starting to make some noise in a market, they'd get Sid the record, he would convene musicians to the studio, they would copy that record, and they could get it out because everything was right there in one building. They'd get it out, you could go in the afternoon, you'd come out the next morning with it printed, just let the ink dry on the label, and it's it's out on the trucks and being shipped to his distributor. So he was able to undercut a lot of other record companies, the smaller companies, and get his hits onto the jukeboxes, which were a huge part of the music industry back then. In fact, Billboard magazine had jukebox charts, as well as into the stores. And at that point, it was less of a cult of personality as we are today, so you might just ask for the record Soft, as opposed to Soft by Tiny Bradshaw, and you would get the song. It was almost like the sheet music days, where the song was the most important thing. And there were people, King had like an Ernest Tubb sound-alike, and they had a wide variety of artists that could do like cover versions of things. So this was a big part of the industry, and a lot of the sessions. And King was at that point a real hit factory, and you were playing on some of the biggest records on King. People that aren't that well known today, like Little Willie John, who was one of the founders of soul music that transitioned into a softer rhythm and blues sound than the jump blues. And so tell us about recording Little Willie.
Little Willie John was, he was a professional. He had a hang-up though. He was a little guy, smaller than I am, and he always thought people were picking on him. And he and Sid didn't get along too well, but we loved to record with him because when he came in, he always had his material ready, and we didn't have to do maybe 20 tapes on a tune before we got a master. And he was just a wonderful guy to work with, but very touchy. I mean, he was always looking for a fight, and you know what happened to him as a result of having this kind of a personality. But
actually, they don't. So, what did happen to him as a result?
Well, somebody knifed him. He was in jail, and
he had a drug problem as well, right? That's why he was in jail.
Right. He had a lot of problems, but they recently did a King Recording Studio tribute in Cincinnati. We had some of his relatives come down.
Oh.
And that's the first time I did most of all his recordings. That's the first time I've been in here.
Well, my sister has recorded for Stax Records, or Mabel John made some Stax Records, and she became a preacher. Then later on, I think she's in the 20 Feet from Stardom film as well. So if you've seen that, it's a great music documentary about the backup singers. Mabel John, I believe, is in that. But the song that Little Willie John will always be remembered for was Fever. That's the original version of the song that Peggy Lee. Peggy Lee's version, I think, got 3 Grammy nominations at the very first Grammy Awards in 1959. But I like Willie John's version of it. It's slower, and it's got gorgeous strings from the Cincinnati Symphony are playing on it. And of course, on drums, Philip Paul. So we'll hear a sample of that. That was 1956, and kind of music was going through that transition. That was the year Sam Cooke left the Soul Stirrers and went into what became soul music. It was the year of Elvis, obviously, on RCA, so there's a lot of different things happening. If you listen to the Elvis version of Fever, in fact, you'll hear that he's copying Little Willie John's version. He's not covering the Peggy Lee version, which sold a lot more copies. But Cincinnati, at that point, also had a very active casino scene on the other side of the river. You know, there was a lot of bootlegging going on in Cincinnati in the 20s, and the question once Prohibition ended is, what do you do with all that money that you've gotten? And the answer was, as far as the Cleveland syndicate was, you open casinos in northern Kentucky. And so there were huge, elaborate casinos, there were small little joints, there were black casinos, white casinos, and a lot of performers coming in to play at them. There's always, Since music is kind of a side effect of culture, a side effect of history, anytime there's corruption in a place, there's a lot of great music, it seems like. Kansas City is when you saw Count Basie and all the great jazz come out when they had a corrupt administration. Northern Kentucky just kind of let it go in the north because it was very far from Frankfurt, it was far from the big cities, and it was just right across the river from Cincinnati. So it was almost like the Tijuana for Cincinnati. And some great musicians were down there. Charles Brown, who was the voice of Johnny Moore's Three Blazers and did Driftin' Blues, which is one of the important blues records, went on his own and was unfortunately a degenerate gambler, as Tony Soprano would say, and lost so much money to the casino owners that Frank Screw Andrews, who was the mob boss in northern Kentucky, basically had him work off his debt, which took years. So it was almost like Charles Brown was owned by Screw Andrews and was not freed until Screw died in the 60s. But he was still making great records. That's the kind of the sad part of this. And he made probably, you've made such amazing records, and you've been on Fever. We'll hear some more later. But the record you played on, I think that more people have heard than any other, is this Charles Brown record we're about to hear now.
Bells will be ringing, the glad oh, what a Christmas to have the blues. My baby's gone, I have no friend to wish me greeting once again.
We're all going to be starting to hear that. Any day now, we'll be hearing for Christmas. We hear it every year. It was number one. It hit the Hot 100 when it was released in 1960, and it was on the, I think it topped the Christmas charts every year. At least it appeared on the Christmas charts for the next 9 years, and went to number one in 1972.
I always get kind of ill when I hear that too. I guess you're gonna say this is all this guy talks about, but when I hear it, I realize all the money that's been made on this record, and I got a measly, I think, $37.50. That's a drag. But I guess that's the music business is a little bit better now. We're talking about the 1950s. So, but I get sick every time I hear it.
Well, you're going to get sick a lot, I guess, in the next few months. Making history and making money are two entirely different things. Now, since we are in the Country Music Hall of Fame, of course, you are a pioneering country drummer. That's the thing. Drums, as we know, were not really a part of country music for a very, very long time. The Grand Ole Opry historically wouldn't allow a drummer on stage. That's we've all heard. I think that story's probably told in the museum somewhere. The Everly Brothers supposedly had to hide their drummer behind the curtain when they played. Bob Wills was told he had to hide his drummer behind the stage. It wasn't considered. There's an idea of what country music is and what country music isn't. But if as far as the records went on to jukeboxes and honky tonks and were kind of competing with some of that rhythm and blues stuff, you needed a bigger beat on them. So I guess did it start with Sid bringing you into overdub older country records?
Yeah. Again, Sid approached me one day and he said, I got something I want you to do for me. So I said, okay. He said, I got a lot of country tapes that I want to update, because up till then, you wouldn't hear drums on country records. Just fiddles or whatever other string instruments that were involved. But he said, I want you to use the headphones and listen to the tape and add a drum beat that's appropriate to all these country records. So So I did that for about maybe over a year, and they came out pretty good, and Sid sold some country records. And that's the way I started recording with country artists.
And then they actually started bringing in, you were part of some live sessions.
Yeah, Stanley Brothers, Cowboy, Copus.
Yeah, tell us about recording with Cowboy, because that was one of the first, you were on his biggest hit, Alabama, actually.
Right, right. Well, Sid told me that Cowboy Copus was coming in, and he did. Came in with his big cowboy hat. He looked at me as if to say, well, what are you doing here? You know, but he said, hey boy, what you gonna do? So I looked at him, I had an attitude then myself. So I said, what you want me to do, boy? So he said, what you gonna do? I said, let me hear what you're gonna record. Let me hear it. So he did something, and it needed some drums bad. So he started playing something with a 2-beat, and he said, what you gonna do, boy? So I picked up a brush and a stick, and I listened to the way the melody was going, and I started playing the drum and stick. He said, that's it, boy, let's cut this. He cut the record, came out beautiful. He was my friend from then on.
A hit record makes friends. Would you like to play on
sure.
that track? So we're going to hear Alabama, and Phil has kind of for this, you know, one thing is he sort of was inventing what to play with a country guitar as opposed to the rhythm and blues stuff. And if you, and I'm sure many people in this crowd play country guitar, so if you're playing rhythm, you hit the bass note, you hit the strum, that boom, chang. And so to kind of replicate that on the drums, Phil uses a stick for the boom and a brush for the chang. So we're going to hear Alabama, that Phil played on. It was the late Cowboy Copus, who died in the plane crash with Patsy Cline and Hawkshaw Hawkins. We'll hear Cowboy's biggest hit, 1960s, Alabama. Short example. You don't have to play with this. We're going to show how you did the overdubs, and then we'll go on to the Freddie King segment. So just to save you from having to go back and forth, so just stay in place for now. And let's hear. This is an example of one of the things that Sid did. Again, going back to the Sam Phillips thing, the idea of that crossover between black and white music together. Sid's idea was to do that, but it was largely actually to cash out on his publishing holdings. So he would have black artists do country songs and country artists do African, rhythm and blues songs. And one of I think the oddest examples was Finger Poppin' Time, which was a hit for Hank Ballard and the Midnighters with Philip Hall playing the drums. And Sid then gave it to the most hardcore bluegrass group on the label, which was Ralph and Carter Stanley, the Stanley Brothers, do Finger Poppin' Time. And it's still pretty funny, even today. And then they did a version that they released, though. They figured we need to get some drums on it, so the young kids will dance to it, I guess. I don't know what he was thinking. But, of course, the call went out, and Phil walked the quarter mile, I guess, from his house and came down to the studio. So this is kind of an example of the evolution of the music. We'll hear Hank Ballard's, a sample from that, into the Stanley Brothers, which was the undubbed version, and we'll finish that up with the overdubbed version. So no demo this time, it's just the recordings. And take it away. Hey now, hey now, hey now, hey now, it's That would be the process. You would play that track, which was the undubbed version, and then you would hear that. But some of the most influential records I think you played on was the Freddie King sides that were done at Federal, I guess one of the subsidiary labels. And Freddie was, I guess he spent time in Texas Bluesman, but he spent a lot of time in Chicago. And but he did all his recording in Cincinnati with the same group. I mean, it was Sonny Thompson and Bill Willis, who later took up organ. Freddie Jordan, and you on drums. Use the microphone that's by your. Let's see. Pull that mic over if you could.
Okay.
So, what was it like recording with Freddie King? He seemed like he was he knew what he wanted.
Well, Freddie King was another artist, somewhat like Little Willie John. He had played on the road. When he came into the studio, he knew what he wanted to do because he tried this out in the different houses he played at on the road, and he knew that it was a crowd pleaser. So he would come in, especially when he did his Hot Top Hit there. He would stand in the corner and then practice, and one of the guitar players would join him. I'd play a rhythm, and he said, "Let's cut it." So we did a master in one take, and it was so good that they said, let's do another one. We might lose this one. We did 3 takes, and we had 3 masters. That's how easy it was to cut his last hit record.
And this was a Hideaway by Freddie King, which is, you've heard, if not by Freddie King, you've heard by people like Eric Clapton. When Clapton joined Mayall's Blues Breakers, that first record, the Beano record, where Clapton's reading the Beano comic book, that was the Clapton showpiece that he picked for that record. He played Freddie King's Hideaway. And it's been every single rock or blues guitar player since then pretty much learns this tune. This is like the Foggy Mountain Breakdown of electric blues guitar. Recorded back in the days when, instrumental music was all over the radio, all over the jukeboxes. You had Lonnie Mac's Memphis, you had the Ventures, that sort of thing. But Hideaway is kind of the king of the blues instrumentals with Philip Hall playing drums and doing his patented double shuffle on this. So we'll hear the Freddie King version with Philip Hall on drums twice. So this is the quadruple shuffle since he's doing it live and on the record. Ladies and gentlemen. And at this point, this was 1960 that Hideaway came out, and we were seeing some changes in King. James Brown had come to the label and had huge hits in 1956 with Please Please. And you were in the studio the day that James came to audition, you were saying.
I've told this story many times, but it was a turning point in music. We were in the studio cutting, I don't remember who the artist was now, but James Brown came in with his manager and the Three Flames. He did not have his own musical group. They were waiting to do a demo for Sid Nathan so they could record Please, Please, Please. And we took a break, and we heard this guy singing and hollering, and a couple of the guys were on the floor all sprawled out singing. And
it was like they were doing the live show as the audition.
Yeah. And Sid said, wait a minute, what's that noise out there? And I hate to use language like this, but to make it graphic to you and let you know exactly what happened, I'll have to use some of these words that Sid said. So we stopped playing, and we knew something was getting ready to happen. And Sid said, who's that out there? So his manager said, this is James Brown. We want you to hear Please, 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 so we can cut a record. So Sid Nathan said, I don't know what that is, but it sounds like piece of shit. Oh, God. And you know how wrong he was with that, because James Brown went on to become an international star.
And actually was kept the label going until Sid's death, pretty much. It was having hits. And Please, 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 of course, was a #1 song, a million seller. And Sid was also wrong. In the 60s, by the time James was an established star, he wanted to do a live album. And Sid thought that was insane because you can't pull singles off of that. It's hard to edit it. It's the whole thing. You lack the control you would get in the studio. But James was pretty insistent. And Sid said, well, if you want to do it, you got to pay for it yourself, which James did. And the result was Live at the Apollo, which any student of American music knows it's on every list of top 10 best live albums of all time. And you know, Sid was Sid's musical instincts weren't always correct, but he had an amazing batting average over the years. So. And one of the artists that continued to record on King was Hank Ballard. He kind of went from that rhythm and blues era into the rock and roll, kind of the teen idol era. Starting in the 60s, it was almost like the time was over for King. There was a lot of different things going on in music. British invasion, you had Motown and Stax kind of dominating the soul sounds. And, but in 1960, Hank Ballard recorded Teardrops on Your Letter, I think, was the A-side. And the B-side was a song called The Twist. And it was written in the studio, you were saying. And you were, Phil was on that session as well. So first it was the B-side that was recorded, and then some sort of deal went down between Sid Nathan and Dick Clark, who owned, in addition to a bunch of other holdings, had Cameo Parkway Records. And I don't know if he sold the record to him, or so they made some kind of deal that they wouldn't release the single by Hank Ballard, and Dick would be able to release Chubby Checker's version of The Twist. So, which was an identical copy of what Phil did with Hank Ballard at King Records. So what we're going to hear, and don't play with the Chubby record. He doesn't need your help this time. But play along with the Hank Ballard version. You'll hear actually the Hank Ballard version rocks a lot harder than the Chubby Checker version. So we'll hear a small sample of Chubby's version, and then Phil will play with the complete Hank Ballard version.
Like this, like he do here. So he says yes, Jerry.
And go like this.
History doesn't happen. Well, Phil didn't stop playing at that point and continued playing at King till 1965. He was also then, he toured nationally with Roy Merriweather, jazz pianist, and pretty much never stopped playing. He was always playing in clubs around Cincinnati, continued to live in Cincinnati, and today at 90 years old is part of a revival of King Records that's going on in Cincinnati this very week. It was declared, the building was declared put on the landmark registry, and the city's trying to get the building back. Phil is now a celebrity in town. I got to know Phil 20 years ago. Somebody called me up on the phone and told me, there's this guy who used to play on all these King records. And I said, yeah, sure. And I went and met Phil and blew my mind, basically. He's on over 350 records, and some of the most important, and the variety of it's dizzying. I mean, from the Stanley Brothers to Hank Ballard's version of The Twist, to Freddie King's Hideaway. The records you've heard today really are the tip of a massive iceberg. And the beat of it all was Philip Paul. So it's, obviously financial remuneration does not keep pace with the importance in history. But for versatility and just for sheer influence on drummers, on musicians, on music lovers, it's really hard to beat the body of work that Philip Paul created. It was an amazing story for me to be able to tell in the newspapers. I'm not through telling it yet, and thank God, Philip Paul is not through telling it yet at 90 years old. Newly married to his childhood sweetheart, a 17-year-old girl he dated 60 years ago. Bobby is here with us today, and Phil's life story is continuing. Thank you for being the latest part of it. And thank you, Philip Paul. Do you have any advice for people who want to be 90-year-old drummers when they grow up? Is that is there a secret to your being able to do this now? To continuing to play the music you play?
I'd like to come over there.
Come on back!
This sounds like something important.
I will mention Phil's right here is not the word.
That's correctly.
All right. Well, this was a question we got. We were at the Blackbird Academy on Friday talking to the engineering students and some drummers there. And one of them asked, well, Phil, what is your secret? How do you, I don't believe he's 90 years old.
Well, I try to live right. Especially with my new wife, I'm doing some of the things I used to do when I was in my 20s. I'm exercising on a regular basis. I'm eating correctly, and I'm deep into my music. And I'm like taking cocktail oil, pills, I'm taking all kinds of things. Evidently they're working. And she has that influence on me to make sure that I do these things. I think that's where men lose out. They stop taking care of themselves. And if you have the right woman to urge you on, I think that's a tribute to longer life.
And just for the record, you don't need a new spouse to be able to do that. You can do a spouse he's not advising you.
That's my opinion.
And what do you think your legacy is as a musician? What do you think? How do you want Philip Paul to be remembered?
Well, I want to continue playing, and you mentioned something to me that I'm going to follow up on. I'd like to make another CD. I've made 2 CDs, and one live and one in the studio, and I'd like to make a compilation of King hits with the jazz flavor. And I think that would be my last CD.
Well, so many of them were standards, so I think became popular music standards today. And that's a jazz tradition, as you make jazz versions of.
I love jazz. It's I love jazz. It's a free kind of music to me, and you can play what comes in your head. I like that kind of music.
Well, I've been lucky enough as a journalist and as a musician to know a lot of older musicians, and the ones who really have a vitality about them. It's the secret that it works for, I think, everyone, musician or non-musician alike, and that's to keep learning and keep trying new things and keep trying to move forward. And keep yourself interested. That's job one for in everyone's life, is you keep yourself interested.
And I'd like to keep working with you, Aaron.
Well,
yeah. If it wasn't for this man here, I guess we wouldn't be sitting here. You know, he's a very true friend of mine. He's not only a wonderful newspaper man, he's a good friend, like a brother to me. So I would love to keep working with you.
I think we can handle it. I want to thank the Country Music Hall of Fame Museum. I want to thank the National African American Music Museum. And I want to thank y'all for coming out and sharing this time with us. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Philip Paul.
All right. Yeah.